Money? This is not what I want!
You can't just have your characters announce how they feel. That makes me feel angry.
Marvel's Spider-Man is my favorite disambiguous page on Wikipedia, and one of its results will lead you to the latest all-ages animated adaptation of the web-slinger on Disney XD. When I reviewed Season 1 in this video, I wasn't the biggest fan. I mean, every element of its narrative and visuals were handled better in a different cartoon from the franchise, but at least it made the Peter Parker and Harry Osborn shippers happy. Season 2 was announced in early 2018, but its two halves were separated by a 13-month hiatus, so it didn't conclude until December of 2019. Its storyline was primarily one long story arc, and it only began to impact the general quality of the series in its latter half. For that reason, I've gotten a few requests to give this show a second look, especially after the season was recently added to Disney Plus, so it was able to reach a wider audience who didn't care to watch it on the janky DisneyNOW app. I like that I can make my profile picture be the Joker, and it almost justifies how the video player doesn't let me rewind. If you have Disney Plus, I don't know why you would be watching this show when you could be watching the company's answer to Evangelion. But to justify how I watched this season all the way through twice, let's see if Spider-Man 2017 reached a point where I think it's worth watching. Or I guess it's Spider-Man 2016 now. I would question that, but I've lost all sense of time, and might believe you if you said it was May. Season 2 wastes little time in setting up its themes and plot devices. Peter gets a job at the Daily Bugle taking photos of Spider-Man to pay for his school tuition, which gives J. Jonah Jameson the means to frame the webhead as a menace in the eyes of the public. J.K. Simmons does not return to reprise his role in a cartoon for the first time since 2012, and instead they got Bob Joles. This is more or less a Simmons impression, but Joles does a good job voicing a character who screams all of his lines. In a show where most of the cast is a variation on Jimmy Neutron, JJJ is somehow the most down-to-earth figure, especially to someone like me, who has also spent hours yelling about Spider-Man.
Yeah, what's going on here, Web for Brains? How are there two of me? Two of you? There are two of me! You're a fake! I'm a fake!
You're comparing yourself to me?
Jameson's bad press gives importance to how reputation affects one's identity, which is also seen in how both Dr. Octopus and Vulture don't want to be labeled as villains, and ask for a second chance. This decision backfires within 2 episodes and 6 minutes, respectively. As an audience member, it's hard to trust that the villains might be good and the hero might be bad if very little time is given to make either possibility believable. J. Jonah Jameson didn't need a legitimate reason to hate Spider-Man. In fact, that's part of the reason why his character works so well. But it could have planted a seed of doubt in Peter that he needed to change his approach to heroics, because that thought never crosses his mind, and he's never directly impacted by J. Jonah's actions. JJJ is also forgotten about as the season runs its course, and it's a waste of his character to only use him as a jumping off point. On the flip side, I know the idea of Doc Ock being a hero was explored last season, but not even having a single full episode making that seem like a legitimate possibility cheapens the reveal of his true colors, where Otto also turns Super Saiyan Blue. I didn't realize I wrote a pun until I just said it out loud. Speaking of an unrelated topic, let's talk about Eddie Brock. Season 1 told their rendition of the alien costume storyline, seemingly to introduce Venom into the fray as soon as possible. Brock's aggressive nature and hatred for Peter Parker is a big part of what makes Venom such a formidable threat, so it was good to see that remedied when Venom was brought back. Only problem is that he returns in the same episode where Brock says his first line. Oh sure, Eddie's in a few other episodes that set him up, but there he just stands around looking angry. It's an insult to Venom, a character who not only has his own Eminem theme song, but was also built up over numerous previous appearances. It's only after becoming Venom that Peter gets a clue as to the kind of guy Eddie is, which is a really backwards way to handle development. The hatred Brock contributes to the relationship is so surface level that they didn't even bother keeping him around the next time Venom shows up. Despite being a pivotal episode story-wise, I almost forgot that Venom made a second appearance. Without a host to bond with, not even a newfound fascination for Vor can make him memorable. This is unrelated, but shout out to this incidental in the episode who only exists to have a door slammed in his face and say this line.
Who's up for some board games?
This party's a board game.
His contribution to our society's culture will not be forgotten. Venom aside, this season's approach to Spidey's Rogues Gallery is a definite improvement. Many threats make multiple appearances and are often tied into the overarching plot or an episode's emotional aspects. But unfortunately, there's an entire 4-part arc devoted to dumping a truckload of villains onto the viewer at once. Bring on the bad guys. A mysterious villain who sounds an awful lot like Doc Ock with a voice modifier puts a bounty on Spider-Man's head, and Peter has to deal with constant threats to the city and finish his science fair project on time. It's definitely a kind of plot that only makes the Jimmy Neutron comparison stronger. The latter conflict is handled pretty poorly because Pete builds a motorcycle out of nanobots in the first part that he could easily submit as his project. But that doesn't even matter, because an attack from Electro cancels the event anyway. At least Electro is no longer the whitest supervillain ever. Each of these 4 episodes has 2 parts, tackling one baddie in Act 1 and another in Acts 2 and 3. This structure makes each part feel very disjointed, similarly to my least favorite offering from the season, how I whipped my summer vacation. Check out my worst of 2018 video for my feelings on that.
Peanuts? Nah. Nachos? Nah. Peanut nachos.
The purpose of Bring on the Bad Guys is simply for Peter to get worn down so that he's susceptible to swapping minds with Dr. Octopus, who secretly transferred his mind into a robot. Yes, this is as convoluted as it sounds. I know where they're taking this, but Otto did the same thing to mind control Spidey in last season's Sinister 6 episode. I don't see why this had to be such a long arc, especially because there isn't a specific payoff to all the villains that the webhead faces. There's 2 opportunities in this season for our hero to fight all of his former foes in a special maximum security prison, but the potential of that idea isn't fully explored. The arc does have its bright spots here and there, like when Spidey shows his selflessness by helping the Prowler, and I enjoy how campy Chameleon segments are, thanks in part to one of Stan Lee's final cameos.
Wow, Spidey. How did you know which one was the genuine journalist? And which one was the deplorable doppelganger?
I didn't.
I don't often criticize voice acting in animation because I have trouble speaking coherent sentences as it is. However, there is some miscasting here, like when Spider-Man talks to a kid who shares his voice actor doing a distractingly similar voice.
It is my understanding that this kind of social situation requires me to say, "You are my hero, Spider-Man."
Or how the Chameleon himself is played by Patton Oswalt. I love his voice work, but he's already playing Uncle Ben in the series. Having this antagonist share a voice that's very similar to Peter's dead relative sounds like a perfect source of psychological torture, but they never mention it, so it's just a questionable decision.
With your smarts, kiddo, you have more power than 1,000 bullies. With my power, I don't have to rely on weapons. Catch me if you can!
However, the Superior Spider-Man arc is a long-term body swap between Peter and Otto Octavius, and most cartoons that do this plot have the characters swap voices along with their minds. It's easier for the audience to understand, but logistically makes little sense. So it's great to see this series not go that route and instead have Robbie Daymond channel Scott Menville's Doc Ock. Menville's voice is also used to describe Otto's inner thoughts, and having made these two sound very similar finally pays off.
Hey, Pete. Yes, I am Peter Parker. That is absolutely correct.
I think that went well.
Whoever made this decision is a genius, along with whoever edited the episode where this happens.
You have 15 minutes, Spider-Man.
Doesn't look like I'm gonna need those other 7 guesses.
It's kind of a ballsy move to have your main character be replaced with a recurring villain for a 5th of the season, but I think this risk paid off. In switching bodies with Peter, Otto inherited all Parker's former memories. In my favorite episode of the season, My Own Worst Enemy, we see how Peter's sense of loyalty adapts itself to Otto after experiencing Uncle Ben's death through his own eyes. Octavius's reactions allow this retelling of Spider-Man's origin story to be much more compelling than the one that opened the series. And I became genuinely interested in seeing how Otto would grasp the responsibility of his newfound power. Meanwhile, Peter is stuck navigating the digital world and avoiding dangerous wipe transitions after he ends up in the robot that previously held Doc Ock's mind. This space is coated in pixelated blue squares with obstacles laid out randomly. It's like a skate park inside a computer, which is the most 2000s-ass sentence I've ever said. It's a neat concept squandered by boring visuals, although I am fond of how it allows Peter to access Otto's memories. we learn that the Doctor was bullied as a child and didn't have anyone in his life he could look up to for guidance. It's not the most original backstory, but it finally gives sorely needed layers to this villain's personality, and it's paid off when Otto decides to return his new body after seeing Peter use the last of his strength to save his former bully. The arc also switches up the status quo by having Otto leave Horizon High as Peter and return to Midtown High. I've seen complaints about the school being more important to the plot than the web-slinger himself, but this season has had a strong focus on the impact of the character within New York as a whole. It's admittedly easy to get confused when every location that isn't the city looks like the school, even the prison, funnily enough. It's at Midtown that Otto meets Anna Maria, a teaching assistant who bonds with this adult man stuck in a teenager's body over their shared childhood experiences. I like how she brings out the best in Doc Ock, but it's a tad creepy to see this relationship bloom given the technical age difference. Although things never become explicitly romantic, so it's not worth canceling the writers on Twitter over. Nothing ever truly is. After Peter returns to his body, Otto goes on to assist him from the sidelines with Anna Maria's help. It puts the character's skills as a master planner to good use. And now I really want to see where the last batch of episodes will take. They killed him off. I'm getting ahead of myself. After a few episodes where Peter tries to get his life and relationships back on track, he fights Slide, a villain who has the power of making Spider-Man frictionless, and thus easier to animate. It's almost as threatening as Mysterio's powers to get rid of backgrounds. Turns out the guy Slide was working with was trying to take over one of two mysterious new tech conglomerates introduced in the season, which, as we all know, are the cornerstone of this franchise. Also, he was secretly a member of the Goblin Nation. That sounds like a violent extremist group.
Alistair, you got recruited by a gang of thugs?
You might see them as thugs. I see them as the future.
Yup, it's a violent extremist group. This arc sees the return of Harry Osborn, who disappeared from the show after I called his relationship with Peter the most charming aspect of the series. He won't shut up about how he doesn't trust Otto, which is irritating until you remember what it's leading to. Miles Morales takes over the role as Peter's friend and confidant. His wide-eyed eagerness is fun, despite having an inconsistent characterization. He'll call Aunt May to pick Peter up from school when he's too sick to work, but he'll also plan a party at Parker's house when Peter sends May on a vacation. There's an odd moment in the season's penultimate episode, where Miles adopts the superhero moniker of Spidey upon suggestion. This incarnation of Miles was already being marketed under a name that wasn't Spider-Man, so this feels like an awkward change to keep him in line with the rest of the franchise. I for one think it was a poor choice, because now it's so easy to get him confused with the MC of this obscure British Spider-Man radio show opening, which, might I add, is a banger. Another change in a similar vein is having Gwen and Anya get their spider powers back in convoluted ways, which makes the cast less relatable and Peter less unique. No clue why they gave Anya a black suit, despite her powers having nothing to do with Venom. I wonder if they decided to retcon anything else.
Like I always say, robots rule!
You have never said that. While I think its ending is a good send-off for Otto Octavius, the Goblin Nation arc is more monotonous fights with gangs than a giant mech. But the reveal of the Goblin King is something I didn't see coming. It turns out to be Adrian Toomes, the Vulture. When I first saw this twist, I had completely forgotten that it was set up way back in the season's 4th episode. And it makes sense when coupled with Toomes' hatred for the Osborn family and the power vacuum that the superior Spider-Man created in New York's underworld. Now the show pretends like signs of the Goblin Nation coming to be were in plain sight around the city all along. But Peter couldn't have been conscious to see them, so that foreshadowing doesn't make any sense. Nice try, I guess. I still find the twist itself to be surprisingly satisfying. I don't think I would have appreciated this story turn with Vulture if I hadn't rewatched season 2 all at once. Something else I picked up on more recently were the wealth of technical oddities. There's a lot of lines that were clearly ADR'd.
Drop that stuff and go!
How am I supposed to learn in this school?
Or slightly off sync.
Gotta find a better school-life balance, buddy.
Some shots are also pulled out far from the action for seemingly no reason.
Yes! Sciencing our way in!
I just get the sense that a lot of the show was cobbled together in post-production. In looking for an explanation behind this, I was reminded of an interview from the YouTube channel Cut Short with Ben Bates, a former storyboard artist for Marvel Animation. Bates tried to pitch a Captain Marvel cartoon to the studio just as it was being restructured, and through that, he revealed where some of the production issues lied within the studio.
The way that Marvel Animation runs, we do the pre-production here, meaning that I board a section. Marvel then gives those out to freelance timers who, to put it bluntly, are out of touch.
Ben is basically saying that behind the scenes, Marvel animation was broken. The way that they animate from America to Korea didn't work, and it ends up, well, as Ben puts it,
as trashy as it is.
I highly recommend you check out the rest of the video if you're interested in learning more about this project or Marvel's animation pipeline. The comments about the timers make a lot of sense, because when you look at the storyboards on their own, there's a level of effort there that is rarely found in the final product. Oftentimes, the animation literally looks like it's lagging behind, and this problem also affects the comedic timing. There's a gag where Otto, in Peter's body, hugs Aunt May, but behind her back, he calls off some spider bots that identify her as a threat. That's a funny idea, but the spider bots crawl into view so slowly, and then spend a few seconds just hanging out on screen. Now, the freelance timers are definitely not the root of every problem in this series. I still take issue with aspects of the art, like the uninspired facial and outfit designs, or the dark and muddy color palette. But perhaps it wouldn't feel nearly as broken if there was more communication with the timing team, or if that job was done in-house. As is, half the jokes are presented as awkwardly as this.
I'm surprised he hasn't started opening classes with group hugs.
Oh man, I'm on the edge of my seat. What could happen next?
I'd like to begin today's lecture with a group hug.
Wow, that was epic!
That was epic!
As much as I enjoy a few of the ideas behind its serialized storylines and character arcs, Season 2 of Disney's Marvel's Spider-Man 2017 isn't drastic enough of an improvement for me to recommend that you sit through all of Season 1 to get the most out of it. The plot was taken in some daring directions that occasionally left me invested and impressed, but the pacing was either too fast or too slow, the presentation has barely changed since late Season 1, and only a handful of franchise characters have enough personality to justify their inclusion in this series. I'd only recommend you seek the season out on its own if you want to see how specific elements of the comics were adapted, because it covers a whole lot of recent material that few other pieces of Spider-Man media have touched. Otherwise, it's got too many randomly returning plot points to make this an ideal place to start. Like how Horizon students waited 22 episodes to demutate Rhino, only for him to never be brought up again. Watching Into the Spider-Verse 5 times is equal in runtime to this season, so I recommend you do that instead. As far as Spidey's modern cartoon escapades go, I still think this is the worst, mostly in part due to the animation pipeline forced upon it. This is still an improvement, but I barely enjoyed it more than Season 1. Maybe I'll return to Ultimate Spider-Man and see how its later seasons stack up against this. But until then, the series recently premiered its third season, Maximum Venom, miraculously surviving the brief shutdown of all Marvel animation productions. I wonder if the copious amounts of merchandise released months before had anything to do with that. I've heard mixed reviews from fans, but the only thing I've seen from it is this AMV that combines clips with the cover of the theme from Shadow the Hedgehog. It was the third video result when I googled it, and that makes me scared. Anyway, that about wraps up this video. Make sure to follow me on Twitter, or as Spider-Man would call it, social media.
Black Widow complimenting me? I am so gonna post that on social media.